Culminators, welcome again. I have a very different kind of guest today. You think I say that all the time, but I'm always right when I say it. I want to tell you about Candice. You might have seen me on Twitter. I don't know if you've ever seen that I have a Twitter account. It's something that I spend a lot of time doing. And just to give you a little familiarity with that, how do you go home? Oh yeah, it's my profile. And look, I'm pretty successful on Twitter for a regular guy. I got all these followers, and I have to admit, sometimes you check your followers from time to time, and sometimes when you have a lot of followers, you check to see. You can't see this actually on the desktop, but on the mobile, you can see if you've got a new verified follower. And those are often interesting because they're people who, sometimes they're nothing. Sometimes they're people with 2,000 followers who once wrote for a magazine. Nobody understands the system. But I see a very interesting looking name has followed me. And I go to check out the profile. And it didn't look quite like this at the time. It wasn't quite as confusing, but I see, first of all, somebody with a trademark registration symbol after her name. That intrigues me. That's going to intrigue me. Now, I also see that it's a woman and she's attractive. That's intriguing too, but as you guys know me, the trademark thing was at least as intriguing. It turns out that Eva Lovia has a very, very big following. And she describes herself as a centerfold. It's 2022. I will end the melodrama. Candice, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
What made you follow this old Jewish bald guy on Twitter and make me understand that there's somebody out there named Candice who is also Eva?
I know, it's really confusing. I can't remember the thread or the chain of tweets that inspired me to hit that
something
follow.
Brilliant though.
But it was something good, and I was like, this guy seems like he's tweeting some important thoughts or some unique thoughts, so I gave you a follow. So I'm pretty selective. I only follow like 600 people.
You're more selective than I am. I actually am jealous of that.
I think it's so important who you follow and like what you digest. Do you know what I mean?
It is. First of all, I once asked a really well-known, I guess it was Dana Loesch. She follows like a gazillion people. And which is still a small fraction of the gazillion people who follow her. But I said, does it mean anything to you to follow people? She said, no, not really. That's the problem. It's not that I want to be a snob. I want my timeline to be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be selective.
Exactly.
Sometimes I'll be selective just on the basis of someone having 400,000 followers as you do, because unless they also have 400,000 that they're following, because that's not such a great accomplishment then.
Mm-hmm.
But you seem to have some very interesting views about free speech and censorship. And I did a little bit of research. Mm-hmm. Stop that. Nice things I'm allowed to do. Eva, tell my listeners about your career. So, now that we explained that there's a euphemism baked into this.
Sure. So I've spent a good portion of my career in the adult industry. Even though it is 2022, I have been a centerfold in a lot of prominent magazines, and that's just something that's a little bit easier to digest as far as a headline than something else. I left the industry, started self-producing, started a podcast, and I like sharing thoughts, having conversations, and seeing where this little evolution kind of goes.
Now, you also have accounts under your real name.
Yes.
What's the strategy here? I did notice, I think maybe when you first followed me, this goes back probably 6 months ago or 8 months ago, that the podcast was just starting, but it was called Chatting with Candice. And that was already, and in fact, there are two Candice Horbaczes. One of them has, I mean, they're both much smaller accounts. And is one of them like for the podcast in particular, or what's the strategy?
So I kind of just took the handles to try to take control of my identity, essentially, because there's so many catfish accounts out there. And unfortunately, the stories that I hear, because people write to me all the time after they go through this, they're really sad, and it sucks that people have to go through them. So it's just trying to take control of the narrative. And then you spend all of this time building this very large social platform, so you don't want to completely abandon it. So it's like if I can post my new projects that I'm working on, even though it's under my real name, I'm still going to use that to push it. It just seems like there's going to be a natural crossover. And of course, some people are going to think that I'm not qualified, or what does she think that she's doing? But it's my platform to do with what I would like.
Right. The people will decide whether they find what you have to say interesting or not.
Right. And they can always unfollow or whatever they want to do if they disagree with what I'm saying or doing.
You are obviously maintaining, though, and I see you're still tweeting on a regular basis. You're still maintaining the brand account, and you've got the great registered trademark, which is a very wise thing to do when you have a stage name.
Thank you.
Well, thank your lawyer for advising you to do it, I assume. I noticed that and I listened to some of your podcast material because I said, okay, so is she just merely another pretty face? Because I don't hold that against you if you do. Just as I also got, people first started listening to me because of my looks. I get that. I get that. But I felt that I earned the loyalty eventually. And now people see me for what I am now. A completely rounded personality and not just another pretty face. But what I noticed is that you actually seem to be very insightful and very thoughtful. First of all, we see that you followed me, right?
Right. So there shows some good signs of critical thinking, right?
Well, I mean, the fact is, in all seriousness, somebody who has 400,000 followers and follows 599, not even 600, 599 people is discriminating. I saw a podcast interview with you, a very recent one, not the whole thing. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't have the patience for this stuff. The reason I do it is because people told me they wanted me to do it. Where you were talking about, and this is going to hopefully get us into our main topic here. The fact that even though you're maintaining the brand, you are trying to spread out, maybe not a best choice of words. You're trying to, you're trying to what's it called? To have the portfolio is, what do you call it? You have a whole bunch of things in your portfolio to have.
Diversifying
your portfolio, right? That was really just an IQ test to see if you're as smart as I think you are. I didn't. You found that you thought you had a deal, and then all of a sudden someone did some due diligence on you, and after several hours of intensive research, somebody decided that they didn't feel comfortable, I guess I can't say getting into bed either. First of all, do you have a big problem in podcasts with double entendres? That must be a tremendous, or maybe just most people, they just move on and they don't.
Honestly, I feel like they just kind of manifest themselves. I don't know I think most of the time it's not even intentional. They just kind of happen.
Well,
but I don't
wasn't.
mind.
No, it absolutely, that's the thing.
Yeah.
No, but it was fascinating to me what you said, because you spoke about understanding the decision and being accountable for your own choices. And I just forget about someone who's a former or an actual or a present, I don't actually know what the status is, but someone who's done the work that you have done and
Hmm.
perhaps still do, anyone under the age of 40 who acknowledges personal responsibility and that other people may make uh, judgments about their moral choices is astonishing to me. Where'd you get that?
Uh,
Did your mom
honestly,
raise you good?
my mom and I have an evolving relationship.
Oh, talk about euphemisms.
Yeah, we have an evolving
I can
relationship.
smell that one
I
across
love
Zoom.
her, but I never had the best modeling, we'll say, in a lot of areas of my life, but um I think I lived my life a lot of the times blaming a lot of other people for things and being very angry, and I think that's very normal. You see that a lot, especially in my generation and younger generations. And then it's just realizing, does this benefit me? Is this serving me? Do I want to constantly feel this way? And what can I control? And I can't control anybody else. I can only control how I react and how I show up in those situations. Um, I think when it comes to like my decisions career wise, I mean, I got in so young. You don't understand the gravity of that situation on even a surface level when you get in your teens or your early 20s. So it would be really easy to say, well, I was young and how dare you guys hold this over my head and I can't take it off the internet, blah, blah, blah. But no, I was an adult and I made a very conscious decision, and it panned out for me. I love the life that I have now. And I do recognize that that has permanently closed a lot of doors. And I think the thing that people kind of don't see is I still have a right to be disappointed. Like that's well in the scope of my reality. Like I can say this sucks. This is something I really wanted and I worked hard to get, and I lost this opportunity strictly because of our values don't align. But I have to understand that I can't force my values on someone else, just like I wouldn't want them to force them on me.
That's an extraordinary thing to hear in the 21st century, much less from somebody so young, and also from someone who comes up on the short end of that calculus, because it's generally the other way around these days. And usually people who have made poor decisions are the ones requiring everyone else to live with the poverty of their decision making. What was it that made you understand this? Not when you made the choice, but in other words, you said there was obviously a period in your life when you were that angry girl.
Hmm.
Something happened, someone happened. What was the change?
I think it's always a million little things that kind of add up.
And it has to some extent be hardwired. You have to have the capability, and you have to, to some extent it could be intellectual. Some people really do figure things out, but I'm sure you've got some just
It's
with getting grown up.
yeah, I think that's part of it, right? Is growing up. I think part of it is your social circles, who you surround yourself with. I'm really fortunate. I mean, my husband is like one of the best people I've ever met in my life, and he's been like a really important influence on me. I also was going through a lot of health issues at the time, like a lot of autoimmune stuff, and I was reading a lot of like spiritual books and looking at more natural alternative ways of healing. And a lot of what I was digesting was how important your mindset is and all of this. So like Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about kind of creating your own reality. And if you're constantly in this place, if you want to call it a vibration or just this energy of anger and hatred and blame, you're going to get sick. So it's a matter of lightening that load and then kind of healing yourself from the inside out. And then as that progressed, it's just more serendipity starts to happen in your life. You start meeting better mentors. You start finding content that's really healthy for you. Um, so it's just like this very slow evolution that just like me as a person has gone through in order to fix the things I didn't like that were happening in my life.
Have you picked up that there's a lot of that going around in this country today? Oh,
Evolution?
the
Oh, the anger for sure. Yeah.
anger as a way of life, as a presumptive way of expressing oneself and relating to other people.
Because it's so easy. It's so easy to be angry, and it's so easy if it's not your fault, because then you can't be challenged to show up. You can't be responsible if you fail. Everything's out of your hands. And to me, that's to choose that. I guess it's one of those like you don't know what you don't know, but at some level that's what you want. It's serving you in some way. So you have to figure out, well, why is that, and then do you want to continue that trajectory, because it's not healthy. And as someone again who had a ton of health issues, I can tell you it's going to catch up to you 100%.
These were health issues that arose because of the way of life you were living and the
Yeah,
work
I
that
would
you
say
were
just
doing?
stress in general. And I think when you're constantly surrounding yourself with like negative people, and you're chasing the wrong things, and your mindset is always just negative, 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 that takes a toll on your body. There's no question about it. So specifically, like I have Graves' disease, which is a autoimmune thyroid issue, and a lot of like spiritual people think it's either trauma or like stress related, and like at some point it's one of those things that just kind of drips, and then eventually it just implodes after you've the last straw on the camel's back, if we can say that. So, um, and it made sense for me, like all of it made sense, and I was like, okay, well, if I can start mitigating my stress levels, controlling the content that I'm consuming, maybe change the way that I'm perceiving life, like things will get better. And 100% my thyroid's like in remission. It's been in remission for probably 8 years now. I'm a lot healthier, a lot happier. The way that I see the world is different. The way that I interface with the world is different. And it just starts internally.
When you say I changed the kind of content I was consuming,
Hmm.
we're mostly consuming. I mean, we're both creators,
Hmm.
I suppose, but even a very large percentage of our time is spent consuming because we have to learn what the modalities of creativity are, how people present themselves. And plus there are a lot of really creative and interesting people out there, and you want to enjoy their work. So consumer in a time where virtually none of us have to do manual labor, where
Hmm.
information, we sell information and words in my case. What was the change that you made, if you don't mind saying, in the consumption of entertainment?
So again, I again, it's gonna be like a million little things, but for example, I used to love horror films and scary movies, and I was super into it. And come to find out, those things actually suppress your immune system. Like I don't know if a lot of people know this, but it's
No,
pretty much like non-disputed. If you watch horror films, your brain can't distinguish that it's it happening on the screen. Like if you see this tiger mauling someone, you actually feel like it's happening. You want to say
that's
something?
no, that's fascinating to me because so I grew up watching a lot of TV,
Uh-huh.
late 60s, early 70s kid, and I came home from school and watched TV, and God played a little trick on me so that I would grow eventually, but much later in my life than you did, and enabled me to get through school and do very well without having to do a lot of work until it hit the fan. But I made a change in my life as a young adult, maybe not so different from the age when you did, and I became religious. I became an Orthodox Jew, and I stopped watching TV.
Mm.
And after years of not of this, of, and I realized that I would just sit and watch TV slack jawed. And I realized then that watching any kind of violence on screen is so incredibly traumatic if you're normal, if you haven't become immune to it. And that things that I watched when I was a kid, I couldn't possibly watch now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Same.
it's the same thing, right?
Hmm.
Now that I imagine that must also be true with pornography or with what we call adult entertainment. I mean, a person can lose his sensibility, his sensitivity to the fact that there's another human being involved in sexual behavior by seeing these fantasies played out with real people so that it looks like something that, in other words, there's a person's sensibilities can get screwed up.
I
True?
think
You don't
we
think
do.
so?
I think we do that across social media in general. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen
Oh,
with
yeah,
adult film or
oh
with
no,
pornography, but like
yeah,
if
yeah,
you look at Twitter, the things that people will say to you on
right.
Instagram, It's horrifying.
I hear this. I don't have a very big Instagram account, but I have heard from other people that people with much bigger presences, how busy they are with, because, those of you who like Ron Coleman are not a big Instagram guy. It is people, the messaging on Instagram is private.
Hmm.
And that tends to actually, mostly private. And it tends to make it worse. It's actually, because it's not even the case that people are showing off. They're messaging you, not me, because, but people that I hear who are disagreed with, you get really abusive stuff.
Hmm.
And yeah, please go on. So yeah, you were saying
Well,
so there's this numbing effect in your humanity.
yeah, I think the screens just do that. I think that the screens are dehumanizing, and I think where the hang up is we focus on one thing, and a lot of times there's an agenda behind it. So we'll say, well, porn is ruining the way that we interact with one another, and it's like, sure, but so is everything else. So what
Sure.
else is the issue? I think the issue is that we're not spending face-to-face time. We never learned, or we're not getting practice at having conversations, and difficult conversations at that. We're not learning to respect each other if we don't agree down the line. It doesn't make sense to me. So there's this constant attack that's on the adult industry all of the time, and it's not perfect by any stretch, but
I
neither is
grant you that.
Instagram or Facebook, right? Like they're
No,
purposely
no.
trying to monetize you, the user, and not to your benefit.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the things that we are constantly trying to explain to judges, they really don't care. They don't get it. Judges are oftentimes when we challenge the behavior of social media companies, they'll say, "Well, look, you don't pay for it, so you don't really have." What do you mean pay for it? I'm not the customer. I'm the product.
Exactly. Yeah.
And as a consumer, I should be entitled to the same protection that any consumer is when he walks into a business environment, which is not to have his life screwed up. But that's a little bit different topic. You've been treated well by social media, obviously. Have you ever gotten any kind of warning from the powers that be about any kind of content?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Is it the
Instagram
adulty stuff?
yeah, and I post I don't post anything explicit. So I'm a very big proponent of paywalls. I think all explicit content should be behind a paywall. I don't think that, an 8-year-old kid should be able to grab a phone and just see something without any context. I don't think that's okay. So I'm very conscientious of what I post. So, for example, on Twitter, my account is shadow banned and I can't get a hold of anyone to fix it. So what happens is if you type in my name or my handle, it pushes you to my catfish who are posting explicit material, who are scamming people out of tons of money, and it's redirecting these people to dangerous accounts. So what they're trying to do is quote like protect the user experience, but what they're actually doing is endangering the users by shadow banning me. And if you go through my entire timeline, there's no nudity. It's mostly my thoughts. It's PG photos. Like I'm not promoting anything
Yeah.
explicit. It's my podcast. It's my podcast in my brain. So it's like, well, what are you doing here? Like, what are you really doing? And then the same with Instagram is I get stuff that's flagged all the time. Meanwhile, you can have a Kardashian that's showing everything in a sheer top, but that's okay, right? There's such a double standard. And let's not forget, she
There's no
got famous
standard.
from making an adult film. So it's like, what are we pretending to get off here?
I'm looking at your timeline, and what I imagine Twitter doesn't like isn't pretty pictures of a pretty lady. It's Jordan Peterson and Gad Saad.
Probably.
You seem to, and I mean, look, if you've followed me this long, you must be someone who politically isn't at least offended by a conservative point of view.
No, certainly not.
Are you a conservative yourself?
I feel like that's such a hard thing to answer. I would say I definitely lean right, for sure. There's things I disagree with when it comes to more of the traditional religious side of conservatism because I really don't believe in censorship across the board. So I don't think you can say, yell at big tech for censoring people and voices that are on your side, but at the same time, you're trying to censor adult content. So I think we have to have the same rules for everybody. And again, I think there should be paywalls. I'm not saying there's no issues that need to be addressed, but I'm
Right.
saying, right, like if your whole motto is anti-censorship, then like let's stick to that.
Well, you might actually, I had a discussion with the brilliant Harvard Law School professor, Adrian Vermeule, who, if to the extent that my shadow banned timeline ever gets through to you, you might notice I tweet him frequently. And one of the things we talked about was the First Amendment and free speech and censorship, and how pornography, and that's a legal definition,
Hmm.
is has traditionally been a category that was not protected speech.
Hmm.
And then about 30 years ago, the Supreme Court, it was less than 30, issued an opinion saying that child pornography, that simulated child pornography, basically, Sims or animation type stuff, was not pornography because the performers were not real people. Now, that has nothing to do with the definition of pornography, because the definition of pornography is supposed to be that it appeals to the prurient interest, which is, of course, an incredibly vague. I mean, that's the problem with the pornography definition, is that it's incredibly vague.
Mm.
And I want to get back to that in a second. It has, in other words, it has never had to do with the consent issue or harm to the performers issue. In fact, that I would think would be a harmful standard for the adult industry, because there are probably a lot of people who, looking back on their careers as adult performers, who could identify really wretched personal experiences that they had in connection with a particular production. Would you agree?
Oh, for sure. And a lot of the times I think maybe you don't realize as it's happening because it's all a blur almost, and you might have to remove yourself from that culture essentially to say, "Oh, well, now that I'm a few paces back, that wasn't really okay." For sure.
And you actually pretty much have. I mean, you're selling whatever you're selling now. It's your business.
Right.
It's your decisions.
Hmm.
It's your stuff.
Exactly.
But there's also this question of the vagueness. Do you think there's, assuming again, consent all around,
Hmm.
and health and sanitation and all the good things, is there no line you think that could that we should ever say this is where we draw the line, and we're, as a society, we're not gonna pin this phrase up also, because I'm gonna come back to it. We're not going to let this stuff get out there. You think there's any line?
So I definitely don't agree with a ton of content that is out there. It's something I would never watch. It's something that I don't understand or necessarily think is healthy to consume. But I do think at the end of the day, when you have a relatively free market or a free market, that those companies, those sites aren't going to be able to publish that if people aren't paying for it. So I think we do say that this isn't okay by not like voting with your dollar, right? So if you don't like violent content, don't watch it. Don't give them your money. Don't give them the likes and the views and all of those things. And I think holistically, most of us fall in line with that. We kind of say that's not okay. I think there's fringe people on the ends that are watching it, and that's why that content exists. But I wouldn't say that that's healthy, that's normal, or that should be promoted. And I think most of us are in alignment with that. So I don't know that necessarily the solution to that is like a government rule that comes in and says this isn't okay, because that always gets more focused and more focused and more focused until it's entirely illegal. So I think it's up to the people to say that's not okay and not to continue to support that kind of content.
And I do think there's a very big problem. Look, I'm very sympathetic to the what you call the religious point of view. And I don't think there are too many non-religious people who have this point of view anymore. I
Hmm.
think by overwhelmingly the cultural conservatives are coming from a place of a traditional religion.
Hmm.
And a lot of my favorite people on this topic are Catholics.
Hmm.
The problem is we have the way we deliver content in the 21st century is entirely personal. When I was growing up, Times Square, a parent would be horrified merely to drive his car through Times Square with children in it, because the porn theaters in those days, you had to go to a theater to watch something or go to a peep show, and they were all, that theater row on 42nd between 7th and 8th was all pornography and really, really raunchy stuff right in the face. And it was a truly depressing, environment. So now we've Disneyfied that part of New York City. I don't know how often you get to New York. Of course, New York has destroyed itself anyway. But so now we have all these pretty theaters and almost all these ridiculous shows with, whatever. But on the other hand, every home with cable TV or internet is consuming adult material privately. Well, guess what? In the days of Lady Chatterley's Lover and other scandalous books and the days of Deep Throat, law enforcement could seize materials. One of the main things the postal inspectors used to do was find indecent materials that were being sent through the mail, and that was where the federal government got involved. And there was a way to target it. But now, as you say, people make the choice independently and privately. I don't see any way, and I think there's a lot to be said for having a standard that like acknowledging that there's a standard and that there's something called healthy civic choices that we might make as a society about what we're going to say and how, what we're going to choose. And like you said, not necessarily to stick things in people's faces the way even mainstream entertainment does now.
For sure.
But I think the civil liberties sacrifice would be intolerable if we wanted to go back to a prosecution of indecency offenses as they existed before the radical change in First Amendment treatment of that material over the last couple of generations. We'd have to filter the internet, and I don't think that's possible without basically, as you say, it becomes pervasive. It really becomes pervasive. So,
and who's the arbiter of like what's good and what's indecent, and then what stops them from someone who's having a conversation about Second Amendment rights or materials for that? So it just, again, it'll just continue to expand. And I think when you see a lot of like the more conservative Republicans that are really making their campaign on adult material and blocking it and making it censored and all that, I feel like there's so many steps behind already. So when you see Web3 and everything is going to be on the blockchain, they're not going to be able to stop it, right? You're going to have decentralized internet. There's no way, right? So again, I think it comes down to us on the individual level and what we support and what we don't support. And again, I think most of us are in a healthy place, and most of us agree that violent porn isn't okay. Most of us agree that free porn is not okay. Most of us want to protect the children. So I think we need to have like an honest conversation with each other. We don't have to agree on a moral grounds, right? Like that's fine.
And not only that, I think we're saying the same thing, which is that you can pretend to suppress it, but all you're going to do is drive it further underground.
Exactly.
I mean, look, there's a limit. That argument has a fallacy built into it. It's the old, I'd rather my kids get drunk at home than drink when I'm not here. And then the kid goes out and wraps the car around a lamp post because you got him drunk at home,
right.
Or you taught them about how awesome social drinking or social binge drinking is. So, there's a limit to the value of that argument, but but lines are always going to be drawn. And there's no way, I think, to come to peace with, the way technology has changed the way we consume, the choices that we make. remember when, who was it who was running for office? Was it George Bush or was it Romney? Someone in some Blockbuster or video store in Washington decided to release the names of the videos that someone had watched. Maybe it was Clarence Thomas. I don't remember who it was, but just even that, as preposterous as it is and outrageous as it is, you can't even do that now. So, I mean, does the National Security Agency probably have the capability of knowing everything I've ever looked at on every browser under every modality?
Most
Maybe.
likely.
That's what everybody seems to say. I mean, what we always forget is the corollary is that they have so much data that it would be almost impossible to find it. It's in there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Do you think, Candice, that we're on a healthy, I mean, it's interesting because you seem to have come around to a very optimistic framing of life in this world. After a kind of a rough start, you feel as if you've ended up in a pretty decent place in your life.
Yeah, I
When
love
you,
my life. I honestly wouldn't change a thing about it. It's not perfect, and I have my struggles.
this
Obviously,
world isn't perfect.
right, we were just talking about this opportunity that I lost that we worked our butts off to get. And that's going to continue to happen. And it's just, well, how do I work around that? What's my option three, right? Where's the third door for me to work around? Um, yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't change anything. I think it's so much of it is internal locus of control or external locus of control, and which one do you want to pick? And I can tell you I've lived both ways, and once you start taking accountability and ownership and you create the life that you want, it's so much better, it's so much lighter. So many people, especially now because we're so addicted to our phones and we were in lockdown for so long and it was our only way to communicate with other people, we become so addicted to it, and we've been addicted to fighting with each other, which is crazy. It's like this weird chemical reaction we're getting and we almost need. So it's recognizing that, like, how many of your decisions when you pick up your phone are conscious? Are you doing it out of like a reflex? Is it a habit? Are you doing something useful? Probably not. So I think I catch myself all of the time going to do it, and I'm like, no, and I'll go hide it in a drawer and go outside or go play with my kid, and I'm like, this is not helping me or serving me. So it's just like catching those little things that are adding value to your day or to your life.
Big picture, though, beyond your pretty happy life that you built for yourself and that your husband has helped you build, are you optimistic?
I feel like when you become a parent, you have to be, right? Because now you're thinking a generation ahead, and even maybe two, because then you're thinking about grandkids, hopefully, and all of that. So I think it forces you to be less selfish and more selfless, and to try to do whatever it is in your power to leave a footprint or to create a better environment for him to grow up in. So
And
if
it's hard to achieve when you're pessimistic, right? You need to feel that there's a
impossible,
chance. Impossible.
impossible if you're
You need to
pessimistic.
feel that there's a chance that
Hmm.
what you're doing, it doesn't have to be likely, but
Right.
there's a shot. Because
Exactly.
my partner Harmy, Dylan, and I are celebrated among our friends for the cases we take on. We lose them. We lose a lot of them. We don't lose all of them. When we win them, we make sure believe me. But we have uphill battles on a lot of these because of a lot of stuff that is well beyond our control. But every time we start out, we believe we've got a shot and that the shot has to be taken.
Hmm.
And that's something, of course, that you're teaching your children, that you need to try, even if you can't necessarily guarantee success.
Right, because imagine if you showed up to your client and you're like, There's no way we're going to win this. You're wasting all of your money. This is a guaranteed loss. Like, you're not doing your job." And if I did that with my kid, I'm not doing my job. If I showed up and I was like, "This world is going to hell. There's no saving it. The country's over." Like that, I'm not doing my job as a parent.
You know, why is it that so many, there's something, for example, like, let's say one of the most frustrating things that's going on is the seeming lack of accountability for people who do things that are wrong,
Hmm.
illegal, in fact, outright illegal, and there are no consequences. And then you'll have the rare story of someone being indicted or someone announcing an investigation or someone being convicted. And then hundreds of people rush in and say, nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. No, it's not going to lead anywhere. It's a dead end. What do you think psychologically is going on there. I have a theory, but I'd like to hear what you think it is.
So why are they assuming that nothing's going to happen or that I'll
Not
be?
not only assuming it, why do they go through the trouble of firing up the iPhone just so they can get on and say it's not going to help, it's hopeless, it's never going to help?
Oh man, I think so when it comes to like, well, nothing's going to happen and you can do whatever you want and there's no consequence, I think a lot of that's probably just based off of their experience, maybe with their parenting. I know a lot of younger parents don't believe in punishment. It's like this gentle parenting where you're just like their best friend the whole time and there is no wrong and you can just keep trying. There's infinite amount of chances. That's not going to help them be a resilient adult whatsoever. You don't always get a second chance. I mean, I made a decision with my career, and there's very few people giving me a second chance because it's forever on the internet. So you have to kind of also keep them grounded. I think it's great to nurture them and to provide a loving environment, but you also have to keep them realistic and treat them how they're going to be treated when you send them out of the house, right? I'm not always going to be there to block every punch for him. Um, so yeah, I think that's
So
probably part of
these are
it.
rather old-fashioned notions.
I guess so, yeah. What can I say? I'm a little bit of a traditionalist, but I mean, I see what the other parenting styles produce, and that's not what I want. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I didn't get that, and I'm much happier with how I am than a lot of people that I see out there.
no, you know, having raised 4 children to adulthood, and you know, having a larger number than that of grandchildren who are being raised similarly, we recognize that, you know, the child must know that the parent is always loves them,
Hmm.
but not that everything they do is the right thing to do, and
Right.
that they have to learn and grow, make their mistakes. Let me tell you though why I think people do it. I think people do it because they're trying to prevent themselves from hoping. They don't want to be hurt.
Mm.
You know, it's like the girl, he doesn't even know I'm alive. Like, she's trying to convince herself that the guy that she has a crush on couldn't possibly consider going out with her because she can't come. That would be better than hoping and being and being disappointed.
Hmm.
But what it ends up happening is you become a doom, you know, Debbie Downer. You know,
Hmm.
you're everything is hopeless. You know, or who was it from Winnie the Pooh? The Eeyore.
You're,
Yeah, it's not gonna help. You know, we don't
but
have
then you
room for.
But then you
Yeah,
realize it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And then when you look at these people's lives, it's like, well, of course, that's what you're bringing into your reality. You're saying no one's going to love you. You're saying you're never going to be successful. You're saying that your world is terrible and that you're broke and all of these things. And then guess what? All of that ends up being true.
no. So this is part of your mindset training. The visualization. I hear it. I see it.
I
Candice,
believe in it for sure.
well, you believe in it, and you seem to have mastered it, and it has been a truly charming opportunity discussing these topics with you. And I thank you very much for coming onto the show. And hopefully, we will talk again soon.
Yeah, I would love that. And thank you for having me on.
My pleasure.